So, you raised today a very interesting point about the fact that Ukrainian experience is a Black experience, if we're speaking in terms of American media. Could you tell me more about that?
Yeah, so basically, the reason why I frame the Ukrainian experience as a Black experience is because it's an entry point to make people say, oh, really? And they are listening. And so it's my responsibility to draw the parallels. And there's a difference between saying that there are similar experiences, saying an exact experience. We both know that they're not exact, but when you listen to Putin talk about Ukrainians, he talks about them like they're white trash, right? I mean, and you know that there's an ethnic slur that's directed at Ukrainians. You know, it starts with the H, and we know it. When Putin would talk about Ukraine as not being a real country, not being a real people, one of the ways that a genocide starts is when you dehumanize people. I'm also aware of the colonial history in Ukraine that goes back hundreds of years. And you have to think about Russia as I look at Russia as it's not only a colonial state, it's a Russian supremacist state. It is a state where the Russian has always remained at the top, and the Uzbek, the Georgian, who are considered the Chortany people, right? And so are the Central Asians. They're always at the bottom. And so it's very much a Russian supremacist framework that's always been applied to the rest of these regions, and Ukraine is a part of that. And so the way that minimize people in the United States by race it's by race. It's a very similar pattern. The way that Putin talked about Ukrainians at the start of this war reminds me of the governors of states, particularly in the South, that use very racist language towards Black Americans. Mm-hmm. And so when you draw those parallels and give people examples, they can relate to that, because they say from a human experience, they don't, from a human experience, we all know that's bad, and people feel that. Right. Also, I spent much of my career working in Black-owned media. And so I didn't work at the New York Times or the Washington Post and any of these other places. Much of my career I focused on Black people and how do we understand the world. And I know what it's like when people are marginalized, when my community is marginalized. And my goal is to I took special care because I know that no one else will treat my community better than I would treat my community. And I vowed that I would always treat any other community with that same respect.
Oh, thank you.
Right?
Wow.
So that's the responsibility that we have, to treat people with the same respect. How would we want someone to cover us? And that is something that moved my journalism. And so some people would argue that by speaking about myself, the reason being is that I use a combination of original journalism and I talk about my own experience because people are interested in it, and people want to learn about it. And that's how they connect. The reason why my audience cares about Ukraine is because I care about Ukraine.
Right.
They trust me and they know me. And if I am saying something, then they're going to listen. And so I think that I'm a very special part of this media ecosystem that helps to tell the truth about the country. And I feel that we can't be free. No one can be free in their own silos. We all have to learn how to tell each other's stories. And by drawing the parallels of the history of discrimination that we faced as a people, Ukraine has its own history. And when you look at it, there are some similar patterns. Now, I'll close by saying that 2014, we had Ferguson, and Ukraine had Maidan. And I think 2014 was really the first or the beginning where Ukrainians challenged the West to stop thinking about them as if they are an oblast of Russia. And for all the big networks or the newspapers that had their bases in Moscow, they would come to Ukraine in moonlight, come for a couple weeks, 3 weeks here, and then these are the same people that go on television and talking about Ukraine, and they don't know shit about Ukraine. right?
But you've been to Ukraine a lot of
Since 2008, I was a Fulbright grantee here. I was in Ukraine for 1 year and a half as a Fulbright grantee. And then for my graduate studies, I focused on Ukraine. And the only difference is that during that period, the State Department, which paid for my postgraduate education, it paid for Russian. So yes, I learned a double language, so excuse me, okay? I'm taking Ukrainian this summer. So I had a really strong understanding of Ukrainian politics and Ukrainian culture. But the reason why people are talking about Ukraine now is because social media empowered individual Ukrainian activists and voices to do it. The West was not going to do it on its own. The reason why you have so much interest in Ukraine is because Ukrainians forced it. The reason why the Black Lives Matter movement was so powerful is because black people independently forced it. Mainstream media didn't do it on its own. It was reluctant. Just as they were reluctant to fully understand Ukraine for Ukraine, mainstream media in the United States was reluctant and had to be pushed to understand black people. Yeah.
So, in Ukraine, I often feel the struggle that Ukrainians are really self-centered, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I attribute that to the colonial experience. We don't really care about what goes on. Of course, individual people care, but Ukrainians as a whole, they're like, oh, our struggles, our pain, it's all about us. So, as you come from the African American community, and you also have a legacy of oppression, I'm just thinking logically that probably your community also has this problem. That we want to focus about us. How did you manage to reach that? If you're working,
that's a good question. Yeah. So look, I think most people, they lack the capacity to think beyond their own lives and their own existences. I think that's most human beings in the world, but particularly with black people and Ukrainian people. I do this because I feel like it's a calling, and it requires me to have patience that most people don't have. And it's difficult in both instances. So you have to remember that my job is to learn. Your job is to learn and to gather information. Most people, their job is working their 9 to 5 every day, right? I'll tell you with Ukraine. And here in Ukraine, it's very rare, and it doesn't matter if they're a government official, just someone like you or elsewhere. I'm usually the first black person that most of my Ukrainian friends have met or have some good relationship with. A lot of Ukrainians I know, they go to America and they study at the best universities, but they integrate into whiteness. They go to New York City, never meet any black people, even though New York City has the highest number of black people of any city in the United States. Go to Washington, D.C., they hang out in the white think tank world, even though Washington, D.C. is 50% black. And I think that it's because the very real experience of oppression that Ukrainians face here is very real. But what I find is that when they go to America, they integrate into whiteness. Because one, the way that our country is constructed, it's not only just for Ukrainians, it's for the Irish, it's for the French, it's for the Portuguese, it's for anyone whose skin tone is considered white. So it's not just a Ukrainian thing. I think for black people, I think that we have a very real concern about, hey, will these Ukrainians be supportive of us if we are as supportive of them? And I'll tell you why. Joe Biden won the 2020 election, and Joe Biden has been, with some faults, has definitely been the person to support Ukraine in ways that's never happened before. It would be a much better option than Donald Trump. The reason why black people are so important to Ukraine, and this is it's because we elect officials that have Ukraine's best interests at heart. But I want to get back to your main question, which is how do I infiltrate, black people about Ukraine?
Foster solidarity.
Foster solidarity. It's not easy because unlike Ukrainians, we have a great solidarity history with Palestinians. Because our histories of oppression are far more similar. and we all face anti-whiteness. And so one of the ways that I do it is by doing the work that I do. In order for that to happen, black people need to see other black people that they trust talking about it. That's the only way that it's going to happen. When the war began, I spent half of my time on black media, black-owned media, black independent media, talking about Ukraine and telling them that, you know, Western imperialism and Western colonialism is not the only imperialism and colonialism that exists, right? You have Russian imperialism, you have the Chinese imperialism when you're dealing with the Uyghurs and you're dealing with the South China Sea and all these other things. I don't talk about it much, but I'm a person of faith, I'm a believer, not in the discriminatory anti-LGBTQ type thing, but just in my own personal life. I use that perspective as well to talk about the moral responsibility to care about our fellow human being, and that Ukrainians are a part of that. And that works out well. I mean, it resonates with a lot of people. And so I've actually, even though it can be challenging, I found a lot of success. And people have a strong interest in Ukraine simply because I came here. Another challenge, though, is when the war broke out, they saw the way that Africans were treated. You know, which wasn't only in Ukraine. I mean, they faced racism when they went into Europe, and so it's not just a Ukrainian thing. And so people are asking, okay, why are they treated this way? And then I had to come in and have a very nuanced conversation with them about that, what it means. What's really difficult is that I'm usually the only black person to talk about Black America, and it's frustrating at times because many of them travel to the United States. I feel like they learn the worst of a culture. So if they have one bad experience with a black person, then they think it's all of us, which I think is the result of their own, their racism that they don't realize. And I have to be patient to sit through with them and talk through it with them. And many times they get it, but just imagine how difficult it is for me to have to kind of be here and be your psychologist about your own bullshit. But I think it's a calling, and I enjoy doing it because I do feel like it's making a difference. But it's very, very difficult at times because it's not that many people who take the time to live in Ukraine and specialize in it. And, yeah.
Thanks so much.